Editor of Clash of the Titles Anthology, which was supposed to be ready yesterday, and I unfortunately was hospitalized and was convalescing at home for a couple of months. So Kickstarter will be starting September 1st, so look for that. And we don't have any books to sell, obviously, but they are going to be really great. The Kickstarter video is done, and it's awesome. And the rewards that we have, the incentives for the Kickstarter, are really amazing. And we got a lot of great help from authors that are not only in the anthology, but have signed books and been very generous with not only those physical incentives, but also like Allan, with time, willing to, in his case, go over a story of a certain length and do a sort of a science edit. You might want to go ahead.
Yeah, my contribution to the Kickstarter is I'm a PhD biochemist, so yeah, I could do the standard critique stuff that everybody could do, but also if you have a hard science fiction story that's in an area like genetics, genomics, biochemistry, environmental science, I've got a good background in all of that. So that's something that might appeal to even a more experienced writer that probably wouldn't be that an incentive that is basically just a critique from someone probably wouldn't appeal to them. But I've consulted on stories on the science also, so if that's something that appeals a hard science fiction writer out there, if that's something that appeals, then certainly look at the incentives that Gil's got set up.
And not only that, Mike Resnick has agreed to punch up some first pages. Several of our writers are also editors and anthologists in their own right, and have offered their services in editing and critique and all kinds. So it's just a smorgasbord. There's nobody leaves the Kickstarter wanting. There's something for everybody. So that's very exciting. So on to the anthology itself. The conceit, if you will, of the anthology was that I started a Facebook group, and it went through several incarnations because I got the name wrong. A short story writing group, it turned out that there was an international group of English as a second language called Short Story, and so there's tons of bleed over. And I try and protect the members of the group, so there's no spam ads and people like that. And we got some that slipped in, but as wonderful an idea as it is to have people join a group so they can learn English better from all over the world, it's not really what we're doing in our group, which started out actually called Dek Sho Sto Rai Mo, which was my sort of inherent dislike of NaNoWriMo, because I think that it's way too ambitious, and that it takes people that would like to be writers and crushes them and throws them away. And I realize that's just my opinion. I've seen online anyway people that have badges on their website that said, NaNoWriMo finalist or finisher or whatever, and that's fine. But with the December short story writing group, I thought it was a lot less ambitious, and it didn't have all the rules that NaNoWriMo had. Anyway, it turned into the third incarnation was writing the short SF in parentheses story, and so we were focusing on writing short stories, speculative fiction and science fiction, and I made an open call in the group that I'm going to be editing an anthology, and do you remember?
Yeah, I remember that you put it out on a lot of the online groups. That's where I actually saw it. And coming from my perspective, where I'm a pretty new writer, I have at this point 8 short stories out, this being the one that's to a professional market paying professional rates. I also was in the process of writing a novel. I've kind of just gotten that wrapped up and all the critique incorporated to the point where I'll be looking for an agent soon for that. But from my perspective, I look at this and what he's offering is, take a title. You write the story. He'll work back and forth with you. And then in the end, if he doesn't like it, he takes the title back, you got a story. Part friends.
Yeah, and so the way that the call worked out was that people would pick a title from a list that I wrote. It ended up being over 270 titles, and then they would claim one so that I could mark it off and put their name next to it so that people wouldn't all write the same title. And then over 4 months, we would check in and have a video chat. So they would give me their first draft and email it to me. I would, edit it and give my feedback and critique, and then we would have a video chat. And I would not only give them the feedback and the critique, but it gave us a chance to meet each other and become friends, and to brainstorm and have real-time interaction, which was critical and really important and fun. It was really fun. Everybody enjoyed it. Even some people that thought, this is kind of a waste of my time, I don't want to do it. Everybody went away loving it and wanted to, was looking forward to it again. And so over the course of those 4 drafts, we would create a stronger, tighter, better story. And this happened in all cases to the last one. So that's the conceit of the story. In a nutshell, the headliners that we have didn't participate in the same way. David Gerald, Mike Resnick, Bob Hardiman, Paul Levinson, more or less, just said, I'll have your story in 2 days. 2 days later, it's in the inbox.
But they did pick from the same list.
Yeah, they had to pick a title. But they were more or less a hole-in-one, as was Brian Trent, who was the grand prize winner of the Writers of the Future contest. And it required, I think, 1 period that he missed as far as editing goes. He knocked it out of the park. It's a brilliant story. So at first I wanted people to write stories about speed, about things being fast. And that didn't really go the way I expected. They chose those titles and then kind of took a left turn, which is kind of the idea behind the whole anthology. And then I started writing titles expecting people to write stories about a deal with the devil, because I like that kind of a story. And that didn't go as expected either. And so I just started creating titles that I thought were provocative and would be interesting. And we did those up to 4 drafts, in some cases more. And because I was ill, I don't have the books here to show you today, which was the hope, certainly.
Well, I jumped in on the second round, so basically he had gone beyond us, gotten to the point where he had almost the full list of titles. And he did have a few specifications, which I think some of them were actually in the advertised group and some of them were back and forth clarifications. One is he wanted dark. So, okay, I can be dark, I can write dark. Second criteria was he said he really loved twist endings. Now there's so many publishers out there, they say they hate twist endings, they don't want to see twist endings, they will reject any story with twist endings. It's like, oh great, I get to write a twist ending. I can do that. Other than that, these titles were pretty open. So I claimed one called the Bimani Hilton. What I really did is, one day I sat down, looked at his list, and found about 5 that I thought were maybes. And then I just sat and free associated for a while. And 4 of them were duds, couldn't do it. So it took me about an hour's more free association before I decided, yeah, I'm going to claim this one, the Bimani Hilton. And the first thing I did is I said, what in the world is Bimani? So
I meant Bimini.
I wasn't going to admit that. I had told him later that let's try and pass this off as your brilliant insight rather than a typo that you are later going to...
It was his brilliant insight.
It actually was a typo. I didn't know that at the time. But trying to read into the mind of somebody I've never met, not knowing that it was just a typo, because there is a place in the Bahamas called Bimini. I then sat and thought, why in the world would he have made this one-letter substitution? It can't really be Bimini. I wonder if it's some sort of a simulation, a mock-up of Bimini, maybe in virtual reality. So, all right, it's a Hilton. That one I get. I know what the Hilton is.
So this, in essence, kind of fired your creative process.
Right, exactly. So then I said, all right, we have some sort of a virtual reality simulation of a Hilton. What in the world is going to be going on in a virtual reality simulation of a Hilton somewhere in the Caribbean? I thought, well, people go to Hilton for meetings. So what if this is a meeting that's sort of a peace negotiation between some sort of overall corporation, a mega corporation in sort of a cyberpunk sense, and the rebels that are fighting against them? So I envisioned the first scene is going to be in this virtual reality version of the Hilton, and all right, it's got to be a corporation that's big enough that they've taken up and swallowed Hilton. So I ended up, after many drafts, and this was one of...
At least the virtual reality one.
Yeah. After, this was one of the interactions with Gil along the way, is I initially called it Megacore, and Gil said that's too bland, you got to come up with something better than that.
It was broad.
Yeah. So it ended up to be Zaibatsu Transglobal, because I figured what sort of company from anywhere would be big enough to swallow the Hilton and many, many other companies? They've got to be Japanese, because that's the only type they have there. And Zaibatsu is actually a World War I era term for these big mega corporations. So, okay, so I've got Zaibatsu Transglobal.
World War I?
Yeah, just after World War I.
They have mega corporations in World War I?
Yeah, just after World War I. In Japan, it was these corporations that did many, many things that are bigger than any today's
One thing I didn't mention, if I may, is that every time we had a draft with any of these writers, I learned something new as an editor. I learned something about the editing process. I learned something about how to work with writers, even though the workshop process is something I've been through before. This was sort of half anthology contest, half writer's workshop. And so the give and take during the video chats not only informed the writers, but it informed me as a publisher and an editor and creator, and that was something I didn't expect, but it was a wonderful takeaway. Go ahead.
Okay, so basically I've got a peace meeting going on in a virtual reality hotel, and you know this has got to end badly, especially if he wants it dark. So how could it end badly? Well, what if it's there's some technology for a mind wipe where they don't really know it, they think they're at a meeting, but they're actually now captured and they're going to be wiping their minds.
Allan, are you going to give away the story?
This is giving away the first couple paragraphs.
Okay.
Okay?
Spoilers.
All right. So, well, they're gonna, if they read the story, this will be in the first couple paragraphs. Okay, so we've got a mind wipe going on, and then at that point, who's going to be at that meeting? And the protagonist came to me and started talking to me and telling me who she was and what she did. And
do you often hear voices?
Yeah, well, I ignore them mostly, but unless I'm writing. So the protagonist came to me, and that's the way a lot of my protagonists start. I mean, I tend to write a lot of character-oriented stories, and she told me she was basically an anarcho-feminist revolutionary. And the question is, how did she become one? Well, if it's a mind wipe that they caught her in, then that means the story has to be in reverse linear narrative, where you've got various vignettes after they've wiped part of the mind, and how's she going to keep her mind, and what sort of conflict there's going to be. And the story just pretty much wrote itself from that point on. And so I've got a draft now. And in terms of the workshop process, our first meeting after we managed to figure out dealing with the bad internet connections and Facebook versus Skype and stuff like that. So once we actually have that down, because that was one of the earlier ones we actually piloted to figure out what's going to work on Gil's laptop. So we're discussing these things, and most of the story is a conventional editing pass. There are some times where Gil is questioning things. He says, well, you got a lot of hard SF aspects in here. I would think that'd be kind of dangerous unless you've actually done all the types of science that are in this story. And I said,
I did not know at the time that he did.
that I actually had done, that I had done environmental chemistry, that I had done some of the other things that were in the story, because I tend to draw on my background as a scientist. I'm a PhD biochemist. I sort of worked in a lot of different fields, and that's one of the ways I try and make myself unique. I don't always do this. I mean, it would be limiting if I did, but if I can do this, if I can get something in there that nobody's ever thought of because I've actually experienced it in the science world, then I think that's kind of a useful way to approach it, because it gives it a unique flavor.
And that saved me a lot of Wikipedia time.
So, some of it was that, some of it was, well, I prefer a comma to a semicolon here, but the strongest contribution Gil made to the story was when he looked at the ending. He said, this ending's unacceptable, it can't work. And I said, why? Well, because the protagonist is going to have to die at the end. You know, it's kind of caught, she's either going to kill her. I said, all right, so what's wrong with that? And he said, if they ever adapted it for TV, how do you get a sequel out of it? This is something, as a relatively new writer, I hadn't even thought of. So this is something that it just wasn't even on my radar screen, hadn't thought of it. I'm sitting back, at this point I'm still far from certain that this story is going to be accepted. All I know is the editing part of this has turned out to be real. My thinking going in was, if all I do is write a story and then this all falls apart and I don't get anything out of it, I've got a story. So I took my time, I write a story, I could sell it to somebody else. Okay, that's going in, I didn't have much to lose. The editing's real. Okay, so I've got something out of this. This is going to be a back and forth workshop with an editor. And at this point, it's like, all right, I have to write a new ending. So I went back to the drawing board. I wrote a new ending where it's plausible that my character could actually live through it and emerge victorious. And this added some wordage to it. It got up to, well, got up to be about 9,700 words. And that wasn't the killing part. The killing part was, he told me it was dull. He just, it wasn't as interesting as the rest of the story. And he told me one more thing. He said, you know, I really see a lot of Philip K. Dick in here. There's a lot of what is questioning, what is reality. Can you give me one more twist that basically gives me, I mean, there's many twists in there. Can you give me one more at the end?
One more level of, is this real, or is this virtual reality, or some other aspect of that?
And then it came to me. And that would be a spoiler if I told you what the ending was, but it came to me how to do it. And that was my third ending, and I never would have gotten past the first one. The third ending is a whole lot better than either of the first two. And that was probably Gil's biggest contribution to the story.
I think it was a eureka moment.
Yeah. Yeah, we were actually on the phone, and I said, well, what if I did this? And he said, yeah, why don't you write it? That sounds good. And I wrote it, and that was the end of the story. So it's not like he told me what to do. He told me what he didn't like. And he told me why he didn't like it. And I think that's useful as an editor.
Did I really say unacceptable?
Yeah.
I don't recall that. Yeah, and so we can kind of see how this process of back and forth and then getting together and discussing, brainstorming, asking questions, is going to create a stronger story, rather than just submit and get a rejection or an acceptance. We're working with writers, so it's going to turn a story that might not be accepted initially into a potentially award-winning story, which is what I expected of all of my writers. And you know, when you hone a piece of carbon enough, you get a diamond. And that's what we were looking for, was for every story that wasn't rejected summarily to be tighter, better, stronger. And I think the process Allan described is largely the same of the other writers, although I may not have been quite that stringent. But I did definitely say what I want, and I think that had a big influence.
Yep. And other thing he did with the anthology that was good is he had several stages at which people can jump in. So I know in one case, one of my buddies who we both wrote, we both had shared stories with each other, we'd known each other since age 5, he saw this and said, well, how do I get into this? And I said, well, you join the Facebook group, you click join on this Facebook group, and he ended up to have a story that's actually one of them that was included in the anthology. And he never would have known about it had he not just talked to me in a chat that we just do as is, and he just asked me what's up with the writing. I said, well, I'm involved with this, and I think there were probably other people who just got involved along the way. So phasing it over several different groups of entering in allowed people who knew people to get in.
Which was a big help. And the story that he's talking about by D. Abraham is not a time travel story, but a story about when a brilliant physicist whose specialty is temporal physics figures out how to get to a universe in which his wife did not leave him, rips the universe is open, and everything starts changing, and people that are in this government think tank about how to solve the problem, because the person that should be on the front of that effort is no longer in that universe. All they have to work with is the body of the man, of the temporal physicist, but it's occupied by the consciousness of a 5-year-old boy that he never had in this universe. So the writing in that one, we went through several drafts, actually a few more than 4, and we had a great time. I got to be friends with him after I met him, and we have a lot in common, and a lot that we don't have in common, and it also ended up being a great story.
The other thing that Gil's done that's useful is he's looking at this as a long-term ongoing project. There will be a volume 2, there will be a volume 3. So there were several other people who, when they joined independently, they didn't know I was joining, they just joined independently, but then they recognized my name on a list or on a posting. We went back and forth, and it's like, well, do you think this is really going to go through? Do you not think this is going to go through? And some of them got busy and did other things. They went through maybe one draft with Gil and not any further. The idea that there is another volume coming, I think both of these people that I'm thinking of will probably submit to the next volume.
And another thing that I should mention is that I reached out to Paul DiFilippo and asked him if he would write the foreword, and he agreed. So I sent him 10 of the stories that I thought were either the best or represented the anthology best. And he wrote a foreword that was very flattering, described the process very well in his own special style, in his own idiom. And that's something that I think is not just a feather in the cap of the anthology, but is a real treat to read, because it gives you an idea of what to expect from a professional career science fiction writer and editor that is not comedic, but it's funny and it's fun to read and gives you an impression of what's to come. And that's, along with contributions by David Gerald and Mike Resnick and Paul Evanson and Bob Vardaman, is something that I'm very, very happy to have.
I actually just threw out there that this is something where all you have to do is click join on the Facebook page, and then after the moderators look at it and make sure you're not some Japanese spam bot that's going to send spam on there.
I did vet all of the people that wanted to join pretty seriously, because, as I said, I wanted to protect the members of the group. We have over 750 members in writing the short SF story, and it's important to me that as the creator and moderator, that they aren't bothered, so that their creative process can flow.
Well, as I was saying, since anyone in this room who wanted to get involved in Volume 2 could just join now and then get involved in Volume 2, probably there's some people who have
perhaps.
Probably there's some people who might have some direct questions about the process for guilds, so we might want to open up to questions if anyone wanted to ask.
Absolutely, or for Allan, or both of us. Does anyone have any questions? Have we explained it so fully? Oh, okay, yes.
Okay, I'm thinking you haven't mentioned this, but you might have at the very beginning. It slipped my mind. But where did you originally get the idea for assembling this group and getting these authors together?
That's a great question. Great question. Because of the membership of the group and the great writers that were in it, I decided I wanted to edit an anthology. And I'm not really sure how, but it just occurred to me that I would like to control the anthology, not in a way that stifles the creative process, but that brings everybody into a certain theme. And I didn't want it to be about vampires or about, you know, maze runners or whatever. But I thought that writing titles would be a good way to keep people sort of into the genre that I'm interested in: speculative fiction, science fiction, horror, supernatural, you know, Lovecraftian horror. I found out in the process that a few of the female writers were paranormal romance writers, which I hadn't heard of before, but apparently is a really going concern. It's kind of a healthy genre. But to answer your question, I decided that writing the titles was a way for me to have that control. And when I say control, what I mean is that it made the writers take it seriously. They understood that this is not an exercise, although it is obviously a writer's exercise at the core. It wasn't, you know, let's kind of kick this around. This is a real anthology. This is a real deal. So I think that is the essence of the anthology, and that made the writers, because they had to claim a title, not just pick one, but they had to claim it and put their name on so that I could cross it out so nobody else took it. And that also meant that they were putting themselves out there as okay, I am endeavoring to do this, which, whether you're an everyday writer, a headliner, or a beginning writer, or somewhere in between, it's a commitment. And that means I'm going to finish this story in 4 months. And I certainly think that's not too ambitious, especially with the help of an editor over 4 meetings.
Actually, he did one more thing that helped it along. If you claimed the story by the month, and he made it clear that your first draft could be incomplete. If you claimed a story 1 week before the end of the month, he just wanted to see something written, and that's draft 1, and then next month he wanted the complete first draft.
Before a week. If it was a week, you know, we'd go to the next month.
So that kind of kept people on pace.
I was curious how, if you have a publisher in mind to publish it, and if not, how you go about getting it published.
Great question. I am not only the editor, but also the publisher of Clash of the Titles. And the company I created is called Babylon House, because my last name is Babel, and it's Babylon in Hebrew. And my father's family moved from Ukraine, where Babel is Russian or Ukrainian for Babylon. So name change happened when my dad's family moved. But did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
As someone who's kind of curious about publishing an anthology myself, I'm kind of curious about what kind of pitfalls have you run into? What lessons you've learned as a first-time anthology editor? Because a looking into the process of how you would go about editing an anthology and putting it together, there seems like a lot of hard lessons to be learned the first time around. So I'm sort of curious about that.
Boy, you're right about that. You're right about that. I had editing experience already. I've been a professional editor. So that part was the easy part for me. When I decided that publishing it would also be a good idea, I did a lot of early research into what does it take these days to be a publisher. Because I, like many, I think, people that aren't publishers or not involved in the publishing industry, I had the wrong idea about ebooks. When they first sort of came onto my radar, I expected that they were vanity press, somebody's got more money than talent, that kind of thing, and couldn't get published normally. And that's not the case at all. So now I've sort of gotten plugged into reality about that. And with the utilities and tools that are available on Amazon, the CreateSpace, Lightning Source, other websites, Grammarly, things like that. I just did a lot of early research about, I literally keyed in to the search engine, how do I publish my own book? And I got a lot of really dumb hits and returns, but some of them were really good. And I just bookmarked all the ones for editing and all the ones for publishing, and I went back and I read those and reread those and refreshed my memory about the ones that I needed to brush up on. And so as I went through this year-long process that we took, because obviously I had some run-up before and then there's the time after to get the Kickstarter done and get the books published and the writers paid 6 cents a word so that we're complying with the rules that would make me a qualified market. As I did all that research, I realized kind of that the ideas that I had about it weren't in line with, I guess, modern day isn't the right phrase, but today's publishing industry. If you self-publish and it's really good, somebody may take note of you. And what I really want is an editing job at a big publishing company that publishes science fiction, Tor, Random House, Penguin, whatever. And it's one of the things that I was in it for. So I have a friend who lives in Kansas City. I'm from Lawrence, which is about an hour from here, where the University of Kansas is, and I graduated from the Center for the Study of Science Fiction under Professor James Gunn there. And I also attended his writer's workshop, which that year had 18 participants, and we all had 3 stories that we had to have Professor Gunn read to be accepted. And then every writer had to read everybody else's 3 stories. So it's over 50 stories.
54.
And, it's a lot. So that workshop process was hard work and really interesting. But when it came to the publishing side, I realized, that the advice that I got from Professor Gunn back then to go to the University of Kansas Press, knocking on their door didn't work. They were, not interested. So rather than try to get somebody on the hook before the project was complete, it just didn't make sense. So I researched and I did my homework
there was a serious learning curve. I won't lie about that. But it was worth it. There's a lot of help online. And then this friend of mine that's a publisher in Kansas City who also attended the Writers' Workshop at the Center for the Study of Science Fiction is a publisher, and he's celebrating 10 years of his company, Hadley Ryle Books. And he's got a story in the anthology, and so I leaned on him a little bit. And he's got a lot of writers, and he publishes a lot of books. So having somebody that you can ask questions to, you know, in the real world, doesn't hurt.
Other question?
Why is that 54 that was for all 18?
Say again?
You had said over 50 stories. 54 stories for all of the students. If you read everybody else's, that's 51. So.
Right, yeah. Over 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously I didn't need to read my own stories. That process was really interesting, and it informed me about how to approach the workshop, you know, process from the other side as the editor, because the workshop process can be brutal. It's taken not lightly that, you know, to predicate the whole thing before anybody gets started. It's not about you, it's not personal, don't be defensive, pay attention, listen, and don't be defensive or freaked out by somebody tearing your story apart, because just like anything else, when you're starting out, or even if you're sort of intermediate level and you're not selling stories, you know, twice a week, your story is kind of like your baby, and if somebody tears it down, they intend to pick it up and make it stronger with you. And that was certainly sort of the guiding principle in Clash of the Titles in my anthology. The workshop process that I went through, and that Eric, the publisher I mentioned before, went through, is one where speed is of the essence, especially with that many people participating. So it's just time to get down to brass tacks. Here's what I didn't like, here's what I found, I think you should change this does not work for me. And then you get, you know, in a traditional writer's workshop format, you get input from a lot of people. So if a lot of people are saying, you know, your first sentence really didn't work for me, then you probably ought to change your first sentence, you know, or I didn't get it, or this didn't work, or this character's evil, or you know, whatever their feedback is. When you have a large number of people in a writer's workshop of that format, the regular format, it's very helpful.
I think having been through that sort of critique before, actually long before I ever started fiction, being rejected over and over again for government grants is a pretty good training for accepting criticism. But I'm pretty heavily involved in the online writers workshop, so which I submit short stories and chapters and novels to back and forth all the time, do a lot of critiquing of other people. And in comparison, I don't think Gil is anywhere near the harshest critic I've ever had. I would say he focuses on the important points, but I have a very thick skin, and I kind of tell people that when I'm being critiqued to begin with, so I don't mind harsh words as long as there's something useful in them. Even if it's, this part is terrible, that's still more useful than knowing that something fluffy that doesn't really, and I'm saying this part is terrible because is a lot more useful critique, but just glossing over something because you don't want to say what parts aren't very nice is not very useful. That's not criticism. It's if people, you send it to your mother or your grandmother if you want that sort of feedback.
Yeah, and again, I would hope that I didn't use that sharp a knife and it wasn't that cutting, but certainly,
you know, when you're working with writers and you see a direction in which the story could go to make it stronger, and it's going into a dead end, then, you know, you have to break the news, and you know, we have to not break someone's heart, because like I said, their story is their baby, but we have to kill it to make it, you know, and stronger in the next life. So
yeah, I think anyone with that thin a skin probably should only consider this a hobby. Because if you're never going to get any better if your skin is that thin.
And I think the writer's workshop process in general is the best first step for a beginning writer, period.
I was going to say, I went to a writer's workshop with Barry Longyear years back, and he said the best advice he ever got was he went into a workshop one day and the person told him, "You're not that good, you should quit." And he said, if you can get past that, you can be a writer.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of that, you know, and you know, to kind of further answer your story earlier about publishing, I wish there were a publisher's workshop, you know, where you could go and talk with people that were either considering publishing or had been publishers or published their own work. That would be a great utility, but those people are very busy, so they probably don't have the same time that a writer might to participate in a traditional group. Like Allan mentioned, he has a group of beta readers or critique readers, and if you're lucky enough to have friends or you know, contemporaries that will take your story seriously, read it, and give you feedback that you respect, trust that they know what they're talking about, that's a great thing. And after the Writers' Workshop at KU, I got involved in a local Lawrence-based Writers' Workshop where people turned up stories and kind of read them and just gave feedback and drank margaritas.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at that as what to do first, when I first came out of the science world and decided I had stuff that I wanted to say, and fiction would be a good way to say it, because embedding an idea in a strong character, it stays with people. Very quickly I learned I knew absolutely nothing about writing fiction, and you need somebody to tell you this. You need somebody to tell you this in a formal, concrete way, where the very first thing you get critiqued, you're going to do the dialogue tags wrong. You're going to do just about everything wrong, and then the mistakes you make will be much more sophisticated mistakes as you keep going on, and it's an iterative process of getting better.
And speaking to that, one thing I probably should have mentioned was, as with any publishing company or editor, there's going to be a set of writer's guidelines that the editor expects people to follow, even if they're not traditional. I want your first name on the top right line, and I want your address, your phone number, your email underneath that. On the right-hand side, I want, you know, information like, you know, first North American rights offered, it's implied. Disposable manuscript, for instance, you don't expect to get it back, especially if it's an online thing. And you know, other information. The writer's guidelines are very important, because if a writer sends something to a publisher and editor for consideration, and they don't follow the writer's guidelines, often they'll just hit the round file. And I got a lot of stories that did not follow my guidelines, and I made sure that people knew in the files section of our group were the writer's guidelines, and they were set in stone. And people sometimes just didn't read them, and I kept hammering, read the writer's guidelines. And I would send the story back and say, read the writer's guidelines, read the writer's guidelines.
See, that's stunning to me that I hear Gil say it, I hear lots of other people say it. Why in the world, if it's the easiest thing in the world, if you want your name on the top left or the top right or whatever, Why is that hard to follow? I don't get it why people don't do that.
I wanted the footer to have the name of the author / the title and the page number. Some people like it at the top. That's the way I wanted it, because I don't read the screen. I don't use Google Docs, although I probably will next time. I print them out and read them because you know, the day job that I have is you know, I have to stare into a computer screen for 4 hours a week. So I'm already the last thing I want to look at is another computer screen. So I print them out. I use the old-fashioned marks for a proofreader, and that is what I use when I go into the session with the writer. So oftentimes when we would be, you know, in between first draft, second draft, third draft, whatever, I would be giving feedback and the writers would be typing it directly into the story rather than maybe typing notes or realizing that I'm going to send them this after we're done. But writing clarifies thought. So when you're getting information that's important, writing it down helps crystallize it in the mind.
You know, it's 10:53. We didn't have a timekeeper in here, which I thought we were supposed to, but we're already 3 minutes over. So why don't we?
We did start at 10:03.
Why don't we wrap it up? And anyone has any other questions for us, they can. We'll be here to talk. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allan.
Thank you.